talk that I've got here, or the slides and whatever, it's something that I presented a few weeks ago in Birmingham. It was the first time I'd done it, and I was a little bit nervous, if I'm honest, not about the content, but about the subject matter, because it's kind of pushing on a question that I think a lot of us in technology have felt has been settled for quite some time. So my background in technology is I've been in enterprise technology most of my career. Started out doing, as lots of us did, crawling around the desks and plugging things in. Did quite a lot of coding, ended up in IT management, small businesses, large businesses, medium-sized businesses, different sectors. Ended up doing CIO type work, CTO work later in my career. Enjoyed that, but I was kind of, at that point, I'd kind of done that. I wanted to do something different. So I ended up kind of being self-employed as a consultant for about 3 years. Just doing digital strategy work, helping companies with their, how they're going to exploit technology, doing some interim CTO work for startups. That was really interesting as well, getting a bit of a chance to help people shape technology and businesses as they're growing. Then I ended up, as Martin alluded to, I decided that I was a bit too young to be resting on my laurels and being a grey beard. I'm getting more grey now. But I went to IDC to work with those guys for about 3 years. So I was a CIO consultant or a CIO advisor in IDC, who, if you've not heard of IDC, it's kind of a Forrester, Gartner type analyst company, but much smaller on the advisory side than the likes of Gartner. So I did that for a while, really enjoyed that. And then the last few years, I've been gone sort of back into business, but more in the supply side. So working for companies that do software development. So I worked for a company called Jumar for a few years, helping, so I'd known the owner of Jumar for a long time. I was helping her grow that and get it ready for sale. And now I've gone to Nashtec. I've been there for about a year, and I'm doing advisory work, but also mentoring the sales team and things like that about, what are the real problems we're trying to solve in IT? Because I do find still, and you will find this all the time, right? That there's a disconnect between what businesses are trying to sell us often and what people think our challenges are and what we should be trying to buy compared to what we actually need in our businesses. So, that's allowed me to delve deeper into the world of software development. As I say, I've always been involved in that. I was a coder back in the day, definitely not now, but I've employed software development teams in different parts of the world. I've had my own teams. It teaches you a lot about what to do and what not to do in terms of development. I think if anybody's run development teams, it's you're welcome to it, frankly, because it's hard work, and developers are a special breed. And then going into the world where I'm talking to people about software development and sort of outsourcing software development, again, I start to have that same conversation where I'm seeing, and I'll talk about this a bit later, where people they want to know how many developers they get for £1 rather than how they can get software for £1, as if you want more developers in your life, because you really don't. You just want software at the other end, really. So that's kind of my sort of potted history of what I've done over the years. And something I've noticed quite recently in the last sort of 3 or 4 years is that software development has changed quite a bit and probably accelerated in the last few years with the likes of low code tooling, especially the kind of ubiquitous low code tooling like Microsoft Power Platform, where you kind of get it whether you like it or not, because Microsoft are experts at bundling everything, whether you like it or not. So, and there have definitely been some shifts. So I'm going to talk about there's a buy versus build element now, because that's what I want to talk about tonight, because I do think the needle is shifting, and this isn't a kind of there's not many slides in here. In fact, I think I've got one slide which is one of our slides, Nashtec's slide, and it's not about our business. It's not really a push to say you should all be hiring offshore developers, because that's as a business that's what we do, but it is a genuine question: is should we be reconsidering the things we do and why we do them and how we do them. Now, one other thing I brought into this last time, and I wasn't entirely sure I was going to do it, but I did it in the end, and I do think it's a good metaphor, but it depends on how many people in here are cricket fans. Anybody watch the cricket? Anybody like a bit of cricket? Oh, we've got a few, okay.
Funny enough, it came up before we even spoke. People talking about cricket as I joined the conversation.
Well, there we go. You don't have to know about cricket for this because I'll explain it, but there's a bit of a cricket element to this. Because this talk is becoming, how modern approaches redefined buy versus build. Or what can Ben Stokes teach us about software development? There he is, Ben Stokes there. If anybody doesn't know who Ben Stokes is, he's the England cricket captain. Quite a phenomenal player. His play is, I guess, marked by what you might call calculated risk taking, and they seem to come off quite a lot for Ben Stokes, where other people might fail. So we'll get on to a bit more about why I think Ben Stokes has got something to teach us about software development a little bit later. But I'm going to start off with this. So the gospel according to Gartner, and this kind of thing that we've all had drummed into us over the years, is if you're thinking about building software, bespoke software, you should think about it and then buy something off the shelf. And then if you're really thinking about it, if you think, actually, no, I do want to build it, you should think about that and maybe speak to some of your team, speak to some of your peers, and then go and buy it off the shelf. Because building software is scary, it's expensive, it's risky. And why do that when you can go and get something that will do most of what you want? And the old adage goes, and if it doesn't do everything the way you do it, then change the way you do it, right? Because these systems are out there, they've got best practice processes, you can do all of the right things with them, right? And there's a lot of truth in that, But I think things have changed over the last few years. I think that with the advent of more ubiquitous software as a service, that COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software, is becoming stickier. I think it's becoming harder, actually, to remove yourself from. And I think it's becoming more, it defines what you do more in a kind of insidious way. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. I think custom software development has genuinely become less scary. I think there are real changes in the industry and in the way we do things that make this a reality, and I'll talk about those too. And I also think about when people look at partner strategies, as I said, they kind of concentrate on the wrong things, around things like cost and capacity, where actually that's not what they're buying. So, uncomfortable truth number one, COTS has become stickier than we admit it. So I think about this in this kind of ease of exit. So if I think, it's when you start with a bit of a SaaS COTS package, on day one, actually, you could change your mind pretty easily, right? It's your ease of exit is up there as like 100%. But as you go along, you essentially do customization, you do configuration, and sometimes this configuration, it's like the old ERP systems, where as you go through the installation process and you roll it out, you make some decisions that are not reversible decisions. You can't change them later. You set up, your chart of accounts, or you set up the method by which you'll do one thing or another. They tend to not be reversible. And as we go through this SaaS software, as we get through the customization, we accumulate data, we start to adapt our own processes to these software. And then we actually end up with specialist skills in our business where people are expert at using this SaaS software. If you ever decided that actually this SaaS thing, you remember that SaaS thing? Doesn't matter, you just buy it by the week, and you can always change it whenever you like. The fact is you can't. The gravity is there. So this stickiness is something which has happened to us in enterprise, kind of, I think, a little bit more insidiously than we expected. And the cost, we'll talk about this thing, okay, look, this is your cost now, it's going to be this same for every month for the rest of your life doing this. It's not true, right? much mirth over there at this idea that it's going to be the same cost. This is something that affects us all in different ways, right? We've all got different experiences of this. This is why I love doing this kind of thing, because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to, you know, how businesses implement IT. You know, I do judging on the CIO 100 and things like that. And one of the reasons I do that is I get to read these things every year, which tells me what they do, what people are doing, and why they're doing it. For somebody like me, you know, who especially who's doing consultancy and advisory, it's just gold dust, right? So the more, you know, I come to these places to learn, right, as much as talk. So yeah, the projected cost and the actual cost, they don't work out that way. And we've got this kind of data gravity problem. So this idea that your data has weight, so the more you put data into the system, the more you're kind of trapped into it. And that's why I call it SAAT. So it's less software as a service and more software as a trap. You know, you are kind of stuck every single time you make a decision that's based around the data model that you've suddenly landed upon. You are further into this quagmire, further into this trap.
So Chris, I obviously work for a SaaS company who sell SaaS.
Boo!
That's exactly our model.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Is to get them in early,
Yeah.
give them customization options, make it more difficult and sticky, and then continue leveraging cost. And no, obviously we're a nice company to do business with, but it's about increasing the stickiness, because you want them to be a customer for a long period of time.
Yeah.
You know, that initial 16-week program of onboarding, and really that's to take them away from the default options and get them so that they're sticky.
Yeah.
It's the business model.
You're trying to engender a bit of Stockholm syndrome in your customers, aren't you? They come to love their captor.
Yes, that's it, yeah.
So, you know, and you know, you've just articulated it beautifully there. So it is often this isn't just how it happened, right? This is a strategy. This is how these things are done. And we kind of have this customization thing where we end up with, there's a kind of a Venn with what you're getting, or what the software you're buying provides, what you really need. And yes, there's a big chunk here in the middle, but a lot of this is workarounds and compromises. You know, it's customizations. It can be painful, right? And that's one of the reasons why when I say we've kind of settled this thing, you must always buy your software, you shouldn't build it, there be dragons. Actually, the COTS choice isn't quite as safe or as risk-free as it might seem. And again, you can all think about, you've seen all this, right? I'm not talking to people who don't recognize this. And there are counter-arguments, right? There are absolutely. And I wouldn't suggest for a minute you should buy everything, you should build everything and not buy it. But I do think the needle is shifting a little bit on the business cases that we've looked at over the last, say, 10 years. And I think if you went back over the last 10 years of solution business cases and said to yourself, well, actually, would that now be buy or would it be build? It might be different. And those are the kind of edge cases I want to think about. So let's talk about number 2, where build has become less scary. I mean, not scary, but less scary. So this is my diagram because it's got rough numbers, and this is what I reckon, right? It's because it's my slide and I can make it up. But essentially, there are 4 things that I think have contributed to this improvement in software development. More recently, AI assistants, right? So, and I've got stats to prove all this, like a drunk clinging to a lamppost, right? But I do have stats to prove all this. But, and we've seen it in our own business, right, in Nashtec. So before I joined, you got Nashtec, 25 years software delivery, very, very good quality, you know, very proud of the quality. Along comes generative AI and somebody says, you're not going to have a business anymore. So they're not daft. For the last 2 years, they've been trialing Gen AI tools in things like, and I've got a bit of a slide about it later, but you know, just things like SDLC, all the way along the SDLC, whether it's requirements capture, whether it's code, you know, testing code, whether it's creating test cases. I'll come to it a bit later, but that, as a business, that's what Nashtec have been doing, looking at that and doing some pretty empirical studies about what that means. And in our business, for the work we do, we can see by using these tools, there's about a 30% increase in productivity for some use cases. Not for all of them, but certain use cases, especially greenfield type work, less so if it's, a little bit less so if it's brownfield. Having said that, we are starting to see more interesting tools now around code refactoring and code translation from one code base to another code base. But we're seeing about between sort of 5 and 30% improvement in productivity, right? So I've put 5 to 20% there because I'm a conservative fellow and I don't like to overblow it. But yeah, we've seen 30%, and a lot of the literature that I've seen suggests a similar sort of improvement. There's also cloud infrastructure and the way we deploy now. That's a lot easier than what we were doing before. That's a lot easier than managing your own tin for lots of different reasons. We've got DevOps practices now in terms of continuous integration, continuous deployment, automated test. That again cuts down a lot of the effort, takes out a lot of the wizardry away from it. It means that we've got much more control over what we deploy, when do we deploy, and the quality of what we deploy. A little bit under the radar for many people because it kind of, like many things in software development, it comes up through the development community, right? And DevOps did, Agile did. And DevOps, I mean, because it's got a terrible name, nobody really knows about it, right? Because, outside the IT community. Agile, it's got a great name. Agile, we all know what that means. Your board can talk about Agile because they think, well, we know what Agile means. It means Agile. Your board can't talk about DevOps because what does DevOps mean? DevOps? It's not even a word, is it? And also API standards. So we are now building more software around APIs. We're building our software to be interoperable. And by building that interoperability in, we're then reducing the engineering cost afterwards. We're reducing those integration costs afterwards. We're not eliminating them. The amount of times I've been told, oh, we'll just integrate those two systems. Yeah, we can all have a pound for every time we heard that. I'm sure we'd be rich. But, that is having an effect. And we talk, that whole thing about marginal gains, a little bit of this, a little bit of that one, a little bit of that one. It actually adds up to a more secure and a more sensible way of addressing software delivery. So our augmentation, there's a paper here. So it's an academic paper about Copilot. This was done, yes, that's right, it was BMW, so this was done by BMW and the University of Pretoria, and they talked about, this was a piece of work they did with several teams. 3 out of 5 teams said that they could complete more story points in a certain period than they could before, after they started using Copilot. 3 out of the 5 teams showed a significant decrease in code smells, so potentially dodgy code that they might have to go back and refactor or rework, that went down. All teams had less defects. And here's something, we've seen all these things at Nashtec as well, but again, job satisfaction. When we did the trial period at Nashtec, again, before my time, but I've looked at all the literature, all of the developers that were using these tools, they didn't want to let them go at the end. They enjoyed using them, they thought they were useful to them. And in this study, 80% they reported improved or expected improvements in their job satisfaction using these tools. Even if they were not getting particularly great productivity gains, if they hadn't become a super developer because of them, they were probably doing more interesting stuff because they could rely on the Copilot type tool to do do some of that donkey work, which maybe, once upon a time they might have had to Google something on Stack Overflow and copy and paste from there. Now they can get an AI to copy and paste it. Cloud-based development. Again, this is another study around software development for the cloud. I don't know whether you can see all this stuff, but essentially these are different questions. So for example, in the cloud, there is more collaboration between application developers and operation engineers. This is asked of several development teams, and we can see for that question, right, that They get more collaboration when working in the cloud because, of course, you're working on a common system that more people understand. A lot more in agree there. You've got in small. You can have these slides or whatever. You can see what these things are afterwards. But in smaller companies, operations and application development, ops and dev are handled by the same staff. It happens more with the cloud. Some of these things down here, cloud platforms restrict the way developers architect and design their solutions. Actually, that figures in the, well, actually we don't think so. There's a lot of evidence to say that using cloud systems where we're not owning the software, we've got a lot more tools available to us. And they're, as we know, they're always being developed, they're always being added to. There's a genuine feeling from these kind of things in terms of whether we look at performance metrics, how can we find the root cause of a bug, are the metrics there? All these things are kind of built in where we would have to deploy and manage these things on our own environments a bit previously. So we can see that cloud-based development has had that effect. This is from the State of DevOps report. Again, lead time for changes and deployment frequency, the more DevOps technologies and techniques they use, these more than 1 month line comes down, the less than 1 day line goes up. Empirical evidence about DevOps, I think we all probably feel that, it's like I think we can agree with that. And even maturing API benefits. So again, you can't read this because it's too small, but this is the Postman study. So Postman do a state of APIs every year. In terms of faster product delivery, so 54% people, responding to the Postman survey see faster product delivery. Things like reduced engineering overhead. Again, that's really important in terms of how often do we have to go back to this, how easy it is to maintain this thing. And the more we get these APIs into our products, in fact, we did a bit of a panel discussion, or hosted a panel discussion with various people about kind of custom software delivery a few weeks ago. And one of the people on the panel was somebody from a software company. And I was a little bit nervous that they might feel a bit like, beaten up by all these people saying, oh no, we can do this custom software development differently now. But he was saying absolutely. He's saying if you're building custom software now, you're building COTS software, and you are not interoperable, and you're not providing those APIs, you're not providing that good documentation, you're not giving your clients the ability to choose best of breed when they want to, you will be dead in the next 5 or 10 years. That was his view, which for me is great because that's a call to action really for all those companies out there that do build their own software to come to us and get their software refactored. And we've got more, things around maintenance. So actually, we build where it's applicable, and you use microservices. I mean, it's not always applicable by any means, right? And I wouldn't necessarily, again, it's one of those things. If you can get away without using microservices in a smaller build, then I would. But actually, for many applications, it's absolutely the right thing to do. You can find your faults more easily. You can fix things more easily. You can deploy different components without breaking the whole thing. These are things that we couldn't do 10 years ago. Maybe just about 10 years ago, people were talking about this, but it wasn't commonplace. So what are we doing around AI in the SDLC? So this slide is one of our slides, and it talks about where we do this. So we're using it in analysis, so requirements writing, analysis, user story generation. We're using it in design, so we're building architecture diagrams, flow diagrams, things like that. We can use that for data models. We use AI tools for that. Development, code generation, debugging, explaining code. Again, in teams, somebody wants to know what this code does. The other person's not here. You've got a way to do that. You improve consistency. We're doing it in testing, test case writing, test automation. In deployment, we can now deploy. We can write infrastructure as code script a lot more easily, a lot more sort of you can just crank it out a lot more, a lot more simply with these AI tools. And in terms of maintenance as well, or indeed helping you maintain, because we're developing and delivering documentation as we go. So all of those things that we talked about before in terms of improvements, and this kind of reality of what is happening in a good, and I would expect most decent development shops are using all of these, or starting to use all of these techniques now. They're leading to a genuine improvement in how we build code. So let's leave that on for a bit, and let's talk about partner strategy. So I do believe that partner strategies are so much out of date now. We pick our software development partners. We think to ourselves, well, are we going to build some software? Yes. Do I want to employ all those people? No. Let's go and get a partner to do it. But often we are asking for, give me developers. And again, as I said before, you don't want 10 developers. You definitely don't want 10 Java developers. What you want is your software delivered on time. You want that stuff out and deployed. You're worrying about cost per hour, but again, that's thinking about the people and the developers and them all sitting down there, hunched over their computers. You want to know what's the cost of delivering these different options. And I think most importantly, we shouldn't be buying capacity. We shouldn't be buying a team to do whatever we want. What we really want is expertise and know-how and feedback to be saying, let's not do it this way. Let's not maybe focus on this. Let's do this thing first. Let's try this a different way. That's what we should be buying these days. Partly because this kind of AI, what you call it, a revolution? I don't know, but certainly the impact of AI means that actually the capacity side isn't such an issue. If you think about the pyramid of development expertise, you've still got the same. You've got some really good developers at the top, and you've got some middling ones, and then down the bottom you've got some, kind of average. Well, essentially, what the AI tools is, they really bolster that lower end, right? You still need people at the top to verify, manage, put their hand on their heart and say, I think this code is ready for deployment. But the capacity stuff, really, I think we don't have to worry about so much. It is about, can you talk to people and can you work with people that understand what you're doing? It's a bit of a, again, this is one of my crap diagrams, but in terms of, do they understand the domain you're working in, whether that's a business domain, in terms of the data you're dealing with or the technology you're dealing with? Are they technically excellent? Can they actually do it right? I always talk about, I work in the Finashtech, I do advisory work. So I tend to say that in the advisory side, we tend to work with clients to say, okay, let's make sure you do the right thing, right? We're absolutely sure our engineering team will do it right. But if you ask them to do, you can ask them to build a piece of software and they'll do a brilliant job. But if it's not the right thing for you, if you haven't thought it through properly, it's an expensive mistake. In the advisory side, we tend to go, let's make sure that you're building the right thing for the right reasons, in the right way, in the right sequence. So before it goes near the developers, frankly. So it's that, technical excellence, are we going to build it right? But also domain expertise and help to make sure you are doing the right thing. And then commercial alignment, really, in terms of, is your partner the right size for you, right? So I was at a dinner the other day, and I sat next to somebody who ran Endava for Europe, EMEA, and a guy that was running Cognizant engineering for EMEA. Very different companies. Endava, really, really good. Lots of Romanian teams, but other places as well. Good development, lots of respect for Endava, very good at what they do. Cognizant, not so much respect in terms of their overall quality, but you know what? They do things at scale, right? But they're different things for different people. You've got to be aligned with the kind of people you're working with. You need to be able to have that kind of CEO to CEO conversation. If you work with Cognizant, you are not talking to their CEO unless you're, very, very big. And if you work with a company that's too small, well, frankly, then you've got a risk as well. That commercial alignment and cultural alignment, that's really important. So what about Ben Stokes? Can anybody think of where I'm going with this around Ben Stokes? Excellent.
His consistency?
Well, yes. I mean, there is something about that consistency, but actually, it's a little bit. But on this headline here, well, Ben Stokes shows stats over edition in controversial decision to begin test series against India, actually. So one thing that Ben Stokes in England as a cricket team have done quite a lot in the last few years is they've chosen, when they've won the toss, to field first and put the opposition into bat. Now, if you've watched cricket over the years, or you've been a cricketer or whatever, and you'll recognise this, there's an old saying, it goes, if you win the toss, you bat. If you win the toss and you're thinking about having a bowl, you have a bat. And if you really think you might have a bowl, talk to your teammates and then have a bat. Do not, under any circumstances, put the opposition in. And the reason for that is, they're talking test matches in particular. The test match is played over 5 days. You're playing on one strip of grass. It deteriorates over the 5 days. Generally speaking, you'll bat, then the opposition, then you bat again, then the opposition. So the opposition, you want the opposition to bat on the pitch when it's at its dodgiest, really. You don't want to be batting last. You want to be batting on the pitch when it's at its best on the first day. And that's a really good rule of thumb, and it's stood the test of time for a long, long, long time. But recently, Ben Stokes in England have turned it a little bit on its head, and they've started to far more often put the opposition in, and they've won test matches doing that. On this one occasion, actually, India smashed a load of runs on the first day, and everybody told him that he'd made a mistake, and then England still won the test match because they were confident in their ability to chase a total, because they understood the pitch, they understood the stats around that particular ground, they understood their own team and the opposition. They were using, this wasn't a gut feeling, let's just bowl first, right? This was somebody using statistics, using data that it didn't have before to make an informed decision, and it's working out for them. England, far more than anybody else. I mean, in fact, this is after they won the toss. Far more than anybody else, England have actually put the opposition in a majority of times. Nobody else has, right? Now, what happens when you do that? Like on this one, you get a lot of stick. If you put the opposition in as a test captain, and then you don't take a lot of wickets on the first day, you get all sorts of stick, because the armchair commentators and all the ex-players and all the journalists say, well, what did you expect? You didn't bat first. Of course you should have batted first. And guess what? As CIOs or CTOs or IT leaders or whatever, if we start building software, when things start to get sticky, guess what we're going to be asked? Well, of course you should have bought COTS. Why on earth are you doing building software? Everybody knows you don't build software. But the question is, are we doing that because we're a little bit frightened of taking the decision, because we're going to get sticky if it doesn't work? Or are we doing it because it's the right thing to do? Now, good old Ben Stokes, he doesn't really mind. He's got a good mindset, right? I'm going to make the decision and I'll stick by it. A lot of captains over the years have said, you know what, I just don't need the hassle of being told I made the wrong decision. So I think from our point of view, in terms of leaders and people who are making decisions on behalf of our companies, I think we need to be a bit more Ben Stokes and a bit more, actually, let's understand what the rights and wrongs of this decision are, and not just go with the way it's been forever, because that's the way it is, because things have changed. Those cricket teams have got more data on with which to work now, and guess what? We've got more data with which to work about what it's like to build software. We can make an informed decision. So, what would I do? What would I suggest? I think if you're in role working with your technology, I think it's worth finding out what your stickier systems are. Where really is that risk? Because that's a business risk. It might not be an IT risk. You might think, you know what, somebody else's software, I haven't got to worry about it. Business owns the data. You know, as long as I pay the license, everything's fine. But as IT leaders, we really should be thinking about the business risk of these sticky systems. So which are the systems that would be hardest to leave? What's the real exit cost? What's the risk of that happening? Why might you need to leave? Is it hosted in, you know, I'm currently working with a company whose development team are all in Russia, right? And they provide systems to banks. And the banks sort of suddenly realised this and said, you can't have that, right? This wasn't something they were expecting. They probably did expect it, but they were hoping it never happened, like all, you know, things on a risk register. When you write on the risk register, it means it's not going to happen, right? But these things do happen. There are things that happen. You do end up, you know, anybody that's dealt with Broadcom or Microfocus in the last few years, where they've bought systems and then essentially they've got a captive audience of people who don't really want to leave. So guess what? It's going to cost you a lot more next week, guys. You know, that can be hard to swallow, and it does happen. And in terms of your next sort of medium-sized requirement, really have a think about it. Don't just say, well, we'll do a requirement exercise and we'll go out to the market and we'll buy it off the shelf. Let's really think about what the modern assumptions are in terms of 2025 rather than 2015. And 2015 doesn't seem like long ago for some of us, but it really is, right? It really is. A long time ago. And I haven't even talked about things like low code and you know, using the Power Platform and Power Apps, which I've seen happen. I've seen used so well in order to produce an application that means you don't end up buying a piece of software, but you do get exactly what you want. It's absolutely possible. And then again, if you have got software development partners, you know, thinking about what are you doing? Are you buying capacity or capability? Because that might be the wrong thing. Probably is. So that's all. And what I'm saying really is, I think, you know, we're still on the buy side here, right? That's where the scales are still tipped. Absolutely. And if I went around telling everybody they should build everything rather than buy, then I'd be, yeah, nobody would listen to me. But I do think the needle has moved. You know, I do think that balance has shifted in the last 10 years, and it's really worth thinking about it as IT leaders and people managing technology. And that's a question I'll leave you with. I don't particularly want you to answer it now, but you can if you like. But, you know, have you really evaluated build as an option in your solution design in the last few years? Or has it always been, let's go for COTS? And there we go. That's it. But I would love to hear questions from you, and just let's have a discussion about it, because this is by far, you know, it's far from a settled debate.